Good day, my name is Maribel Ongon and I'm looking forward to talking with you about the topic, the Renaissance period. This is the collaborative report of Group 3. The Renaissance. It comes from the French language and simple means rebirth. It is refers to the European history of 14th to 17th century. Renaissance are considered more intellectual and cultural movement rather than historical period. It is because it is the march of modernity and progress. It is a sharp break of medieval values and institutions, a new awareness of an individual, an awakened interest of material world and nature, and recovery of cultural heritage of ancient Greece and Rome, which is considered as a major achievement during Renaissance period. From the darkness to light, the Renaissance begins. Since the word Renaissance means rebirth, it must naturally follow that the era preceding is a period of death. Not only does this contrast enhance the term Renaissance, but also serves to highlight or heighten the significant moment of the history. And one of the negative effects of a comparison is the reduction of preceding Middle Ages and the period of darkness, where the life of people, filled with war, ignorance, and hard work, where they work into the ground until they drop. But when Renaissance began, people was given hopes and opportunities in many fields. It changed the way people think about change in art, knowledge, information, and prevention to culture. Through the help of Western Europeans, provide the technology for printing books and all documents, followed by the Chinese technology for printing materials, and later on used by the Muslims and introduced to Europe. Indeed, the Renaissance period is commonly thought as a time when Europe made a great advances in the field of science, technology, and arts, as opposed to the Middle Ages. And speaking of great advances, here are the 5 greatest inventions during the Renaissance period: printing press, wood block printing, telescope, microscope, and submarine, made by the great inventors during the Renaissance period.
Renaissance exploration. While many artists and thinkers used their talents to express new ideas, some Europeans took to the sea to learn more about the world around them. In a period known as the Age of Discovery, several important explorations were made. Voyagers launched expeditions to travel the entire globe. They discovered new shipping, routes to America, India, and the Far East. Explorers trekked across areas that weren't fully mapped. As more people learned how to read, write, and interpret ideas, they began to closely examine and critique religion as they knew it. Also, the printing press allowed the text, including the Bible, to be easily reproduced and widely read by it. In the 16th century, Martin Luther, a German monk, led the Protestant Reformation, a revolutionary movement that caused a split in the Catholic Church. Luther questioned many of the practices of the Church, whether they aligned with the teaching of the Bible. As a result, a new form of Christianity known as Protestantism was created.
I will discuss the Renaissance art, architecture, and science, Renaissance exploration, and Renaissance religion. Renaissance art, architecture, and science art, architecture, and science were closely linked during the Renaissance. In fact, it was a unique time when these fields of study fused together seamlessly. For instance, artists like Da Vinci incorporated scientific principles such as anatomy into their work, so they could recreate the human body with an extraordinary precision. Architecture such as Filipino Brunelleschi study mathematics to accurately engineer and design immense buildings with expansive domes. Scientific discoveries lead to major shifts in thinking. Galileo Descartes presented a new view of astrology and mathematics, while Copernicus proposed that the sun, not the earth, was the center of the solar system. Renaissance art was characterized by realism and naturalism. artists strive to depict people and objects in a true-to-life way. They use techniques such as perspective, shadow, and light to add depth to their work. Emotion was another quality that artists tried to infuse into their pieces. Some of the most famous artistic works that were produced during the Renaissance include the Mona Lisa by Da Vinci, The Last Supper, Da Vinci, Statue of David, Michelangelo, The Birth of Venus, Botticelli, The Creation of Adam, and Adam. The next topic is Renaissance exploration. While many artists and thinkers used their talents to express new ideas, some Europeans took to the seas to learn more about the world around them. In a period known as the Age of Discovery, several important explorations were made. Voyagers launched expeditions to travel the entire globe. They discovered new shipping routes to the Americas, India, and the Far East, and explorers trekked across areas that weren't fully mapped. Famous journeys were taken by Ferdinand Magellan, Christopher Columbus, Amerigo Vespucci, after whom American is named, Marco Polo, Ponce de Leon, Vasconcelos de Balboa, Hernando de Soto, and other explorers. And the last topic is Renaissance religion. Humanism encouraged Europeans to question the role of the Roman Catholic Church during the Renaissance. As more people learned how to read, write, and interpret ideas, they began to closely examine and critique religion as they knew it. Also, the printing press allowed for texts including the Bible, to be easily reproduced and widely read by the people themselves for the first time. In the 16th century, Martin Luther, a German monk, led the Protestant Reformation, a revolutionary movement that caused a split in the Catholic Church. Luther questioned many of the practices of the Church and whether they align with the teachings of the Bible. As a result, a new form of Christianity known as Protestantism was created.
End of the Renaissance. Scholars believe that the demise of the Renaissance was the result of several compounding factors. By the end of the 15th century, numerous wars had plagued the Italian peninsula. Spanish, French, and German invaders battling from Italian territories, caused by disruption of instability in the region. Also, changing trade routes led to a period of economic decline and limited the amount of money that the wealthy contributors could spend on the arts. Later, in a movement known as the Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Church censored artists and writers in response to the Protestant Reformation. Many Renaissance thinkers feared being too bold, which stifled creativity. Furthermore, in 1545, the Council of Trent established the Roman Inquisition, which made humanism and any views that challenged the Catholic Church an act of heresy punishable by death. By the early 17th century, the Renaissance movement had died out, giving way to the Age of Enlightenment.
I will discuss about the greatest invention during the Renaissance. So first is submarine. So what is submarine? Submarine is a warship with a stream hull design operate completely submerged in the sea for long periods. It is equipped with a periscope and typically armed with torpedoes missiles. So submarine was invented during the Renaissance, and Leonardo da Vinci was the first invented, but it kept it secret because he didn't want to make a war worse. The first person to make the submarine was Cornelius Drebbel in 1620. So this Dutch inventor made a rowboat with a leather covering and watertight seal. Up to 12 people could fit it in. And also Drebbel was inventor for the British Navy. His submarine could go only down 15 feet for 2 hours, so it wasn't that efficient. The submarine changed war as well. Soldiers could now go underwater without taking fire from the land. The most obvious advantage is the ability to dive beneath the surface, thus avoiding gunfire and nullifying most weapons. So, while far from enabling steel in the most conditions due to how spotting is done, it enables submarines to approach targets for torpedoes attack. Leonardo da Vinci was the first to sketch a primitive submarine around 1515, and in 1517 William Bourne drafted the first design for the submarine craft in 1620. So the first successful submarine was built by Cornelius Drebbel and tested in the Thames River, where it is completely for 3 hours journey.
Woodblock printing or block printing is a technique for printing text, images, or patterns used widely throughout East Asia, and originating in China in Antiquity as a method of printing on textiles and lacquer paper. As a method of printing on cloth, the earliest surviving example from China date to before 220 AD. Woodblock printing exists in Tang, China by the 7th century AD and remained the most common East Asian method of printing books and other texts, as well as images. Until the 19th century, ukiyo-e is best known types of Japanese woodblock art print. Most European uses of the technique for printing images on paper are covered by the art term woodcut, except for block books produced mainly in the 15th century. Woodblock printing, early Chinese people wrote records. Most European uses of the technique for printing images on paper are covered by the art term woodcut, except for block books produced mainly in the 15th century. Woodblock printing, early Chinese people wrote records on silk or bamboo. However, each of these was expensive and difficult to produce. Paper was invented in China during the Han Dynasty around 105 AD by a government worker called Kyla. He developed a way to make paper using the bark of trees, rags of cloth.
Keplerian telescope. After some development, it was used to observe the stars and planets, and its image were the basic of many theories of the time impact the Renaissance and modern world. In the Renaissance, the telescope sparked a major argument, mostly between the church and the scientists of the time. Overview. Telescope was created around 1909 as a device to see across large distance but did not have quite the same usage it is does today. Telescope is a device used to magnify objects from the far away and project the image directly into the eye. It took many decades, even centuries, to develop the design through trials and error and eventually science. Impact on Renaissance and Modern World. In the Renaissance, the telescope sparked a major argument mostly between the church and the scientists of the time. The most side of the argument were the geocratic side and the side of the church, and the heliocentric side and side of most overwhelmed scientists.
One of the greatest inventions during Renaissance period is printing press. In Germany, around 1440, goldsmith Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press, which started the printing revolution. Modeled on the design of existing screw presses, a single Renaissance printing press could produce up to 3,600 pages per workday compared to 40 by hand printing and a few by hand copying. Printing press is a mechanical device for applying pressure to an ink surface resting upon a print medium, such as paper or cloth, thereby by transferring the ink. It marked a dramatic improvement on earlier printing methods in which the cloth, paper, or other medium was brushed or rubbed repeatedly to achieve the transfer of ink, and accelerated the process. Inspiration and invention of the printing press. During the 1300 to 1400, people had developed a very basic form of printing. Gutenberg already had previous experience working at a mint, and he realized that if he could use cut blocks within a machine, he could make the printing process a lot faster. By means of printing press, it allows people for an assembly line style production process that was much more efficient than pressing paper to ink by hand. For the first time in history, book could be mass-produced and at a fraction of the cost of conventional printing method. We can say that printing press is very important during Renaissance periods because in the 15th century, an innovation enabled people to share knowledge more quickly and widely. Civilization never looked back. Knowledge is power, as the saying goes, and the invention of the mechanical movable type printing press helped disseminate knowledge wider and faster than ever before.
Microsoft, an important invention of the Renaissance, was the microscope. Invented in 1590, the microscope was a major help in other scientific discoveries. The microscope uses two different lenses to be the light and enlarge images. Therefore, a person could see things that were too tiny to observe with the naked eye. In 1660, the microscope was used to study bacteria for the first time. A microscope at that time could enlarge images 270 times their normal size. A Dutch father-son team named Hans and Zacharias Janssen invented the first so-called compound microscope in the late 16th century, when they discovered that if they put a lens at the top and the bottom of a tube and look through it, objects on the other end become magnified.